Or is it Reverend Doctor?
Reverend Dr. Professor, I think is the correct, but Todd is fine. Just
Okay.
Todd.
You know, if for the overachievers out there, uh, Todd Leonard, who I think I met you, it's probably been at least 6 years ago at camp.
Oh,
Uh,
I think it was your first trip to camp, wasn't it?
I believe so. I believe it was my very first time there. And
I remember giving you a tour
mhm,
of the grounds and of the museum, and you gave a lecture on one of our summer lecture series.
yes, and you were one of the camp mediums in the back, sort of, I don't know, almost like chairing the class or overseeing the class and
Yeah, I was one of the coordinators. Yeah.
coordinators. So that was how we connected. Um, and so you are, in addition to a bunch of things, you are a registered medium at Camp Chesterfield. For those who aren't familiar with Chesterfield, can you talk a little bit about Chesterfield and how you came into camp?
Okay, well, I'm not actually registered to give messages in my home at camp. You have to go through a board certification for that in order for that to happen. And because I live in Japan most of the year, I've never done that. So I'm not so much of a platform medium as much as I am um, just a regular giving messages. I call what I call spirit letters, where I connect with my guide and then I'm intuited with a message and I write it down. And
Okay.
I've just not gone through the process of doing that because I'm there so infrequently. So, but normally, um, people who want to give messages in their homes at camp would have to go through a certification process, mainly of which you have to be certified by a recognized spiritualist church or organization that camp would recognize directly. And then you would there would be a board of people that you would go in front of, and then they would ask you questions and listen to your mediumship basically to make sure that you're connected to spirit and that you're able to give messages.
Right. So Camp Chesterfield's obviously a spiritualist camp. You know, people may be familiar with Lilydale or Casadega is one of the other more known ones. But there are camps everywhere. And I believe you're originally from, is it Anderson, Indiana?
I'm from Shelbyville, Indiana, originally, where I grew up. Um, but Anderson's next to Chesterfield, of course. Um, and in 2015, for my own historical research, I had the opportunity to travel all over the United States, and I did visit a number of camps. And that was my goal, was to write papers and to do research on that. And I probably went to 7 or 8 camps around the United States. Of course, the big ones, as you said, Lilydale's the largest, and then second largest would be Camp Chesterfield. The third would probably be Casadega, and then there's Harmony Grove and San Diego. And unfortunately, Harmony Grove had the terrible wildfires, and nearly the entire camp was nearly burned to the ground with just a few buildings remaining. And it was very sad to see, but it was very hopeful also because the people who were building it back up, you could tell they really had the passion and heart, because it's a lovely piece of property. I do have to say, in all of my visits all over the United States, those old spiritualists really knew how to pick out real estate. They really had a gift for picking out the best possible land near water, usually, and oftentimes hills and valleys. It's just beautiful. And you may have heard the Mississippi Spiritualist Valley Association in Iowa recently went on sale for sale, and it looks like it's finished. When I was there was one woman who was just working desperately to keep it going, and just wasn't getting much help. And again, the property was beautiful, and it seems like a developer is wanting to go in, tear down all the spiritualist buildings and probably put in McMansions in there because the property is so beautiful. It goes up a hill and it winds around, and you could tell where a lot of the old cottages were, and there was still the office and the hotel there and a number of buildings, but in terrible need of repair. And that is probably, in my opinion, the worst aspect of modern spiritualist camps is the fact that much of the infrastructure is so old and dilapidated, and the cost to try to keep it up is just incredible. And that's why the Camp Chesterfield started the Friends of Camp Chesterfield Foundation as a nonprofit, so that we could tap into the resources outside of churches. Oftentimes, grants won't give money directly to churches, so you have to have some type of a nonprofit. So we started the Friends of Camp Chesterfield Foundation, and we have literally brought in well over $100,000 to renovate and help camp in different ways. So it's well worth doing for spiritualist camps who are finding themselves in a situation where they think that they aren't going to be able to stay open or whatever, is in order to get some type of federal funding and outside funding from the states. And luckily in Indiana, we have a very, very strong idea of preservation, and the Indiana Historical Society and Indiana Landmarks have been very instrumental in helping us apply for grants and to assist us in keeping it up, because Camp Chesterfield is so unique and so special. And if you think of the history of religion in America, that it very well could become like a national landmark. We're on the landmark status now for the normal landmark, but getting national landmark status would be wonderful, because that would open up a lot more avenues for us. And because of the design and the makeup of, you know, spiritualist camps all over the country, and the fact that Camp Chesterfield really is in relatively good shape. I mean, we would like it to be better. You know, at the FCCF, we're always talking about what can we do to improve the buildings. And I always tell people, if you donate money to the FCCF, 100% of it goes to preservation efforts. There's no overhead. We don't have any paid employees. We don't have any other expenses other than just preserving the buildings, the landscape architecture, any of the things that you see at camp. That's all we do. That's our purpose.
Right. You know, it's interesting because you talk about preservation. And one of the things that I really love about Chesterfield versus other places that I've been, granted, I've not been to a ton of other camps, but they really seem to uplift and hold a lot of the mediums and the pioneers of the past, especially specifically in regard where even today, mediums from 50, 60, 70 years ago, you say their names and people know of them. And I think that that's really wonderful. You're also the historian, is that right?
Yes, the camp historian.
Into that, was it your research mind that sort of lended it to that, or?
It just was a natural fit. When I started getting more involved with Camp Chesterfield, and after I purchased my cottage, the fact that I'm a trained historian helped a lot. The fact that that's what I do for a living. And there really was not a lot of people that really could pick up that baton and run with it. So the president at the time, Reverend Shrogi, he asked me if I would be the camp historian. And I was thrilled to have that opportunity, because at that time, the museum didn't offer an experience like an exhibit. It was a real hodgepodge. There were boxes of things stored in the corner, and it was a bit of a mess, to be honest. And the archives itself, the closet where all the documents were kept, were in cardboard boxes, just dumped.
Yeah.
And oh, I spent one entire summer with the entire Art Gallery West floor filled with documents and organizing and putting things in order and putting them in files and then in plastic bins, because of course I'm always worried about moisture, and I'm always worried about Indiana with tornadoes and leaky roofs or whatever, of anything being damaged by the elements. So I wanted to make sure that things, and of course it's probably not the best condition. I mean, it's probably not ultraviolet paper and all the things that you're supposed to do, but we did the best we could with the resources we had. And it's better than, as a custodian, it's better than when I found it. So that was my main purpose. And my intention was to give visitors some type of an experience. So each gallery, there are three: the Art Gallery East, the Art Gallery West, and then the Center Gallery, that when you walk around, you can get an idea of the process of what's going on. And of course, the Art Gallery West is the Caracciolo paintings that our dear Mabel Riffle had. She had those commissioned by an Italian artist, and he was a copyist. So they are famous paintings that were copied, but copied by hand. They're absolutely beautiful. I mean, they're works of art in their own right. And then we also have the Frances McVeigh exhibit in that room, and she was a Camp Chesterfield medium, although she lived across the street. She didn't live in camp, but she was affiliated with Camp Chesterfield. And I'm very happy to say that her paintings are on loan to the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and she's going on an exhibition, and Camp Chesterfield is figuring very, very prominently into this national exhibition that will be starting later this year, or I mean early next year. And we're very excited about that. When they approached us, they wanted, of course, a Bang Sisters portrait to one of their paintings, the Precipitated paintings, to put into the exhibit. But they were so very interested in Frances McVeigh and her style. And she's a spirit artist, but not precipitated artist. She's inspired by spirit. And her paintings have a very, very heaven-like, ethereal feeling to them. And so it was a very wonderful opportunity. And the Indiana Association of Spiritualists board allowed them to borrow, and a Lizzie Connor painting as well. So we're a huge part of this exhibition that's going to be going, I think, to Louisville, Minneapolis, and Philadelphia, I think. So we're very happy that we were included in that and we were able to participate. And they're repairing some of our paintings. And to be honest, Travis, I wish they'd taken more, because they're really doing good conservation, preservation work on these objects that they borrowed from us. So, you know, I wish they'd taken more, because it's so expensive. When we had our Queen Victoria painting that was done by the Bang sisters, hanging after 100 years, the corner ripped, and it just broke my heart. And we took it down, of course, to make sure that it didn't get damaged further. And then we found a lovely woman in Indianapolis who had worked at the Hermitage Museum in Russia. And she was able to restore that to the point where you can't even tell that it was ever ripped. But it cost a lot of money. And we did a fundraiser, and of course that was before the GoFundMe stuff, and so it was a lot harder to try to fund those types of things, but we did it. And thankfully we have her hanging back up in all of her glory. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful painting.
It is beautiful. I know there's such a presence in the museum. There's just such an atmosphere. It's really wonderful. And you talked about how to spiritualists and kind of their choosing of real estate. Camp has just such a phenomenal energy. And I know from the very first minute that I set foot, that very first trip there, everybody just made me feel so welcome. And it was just, you feel safe, you feel comfortable. So of all the, when
I'm
you
happy
hear,
to hear that, actually.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
no,
glad you had a good experience.
I think you and Normandy and maybe one other person were the first few, maybe it was Mary Beth, were one of the first few that I kind of ran into. I was sort of wandering, trying to find, my footing, find my way around. And yeah, I've always felt that way there. Always, always.
Well, there's a reason why Mary Beth is head of the hotel, is because she is such a wonderful greeter and she is just such a lovely person that you just feel just engulfed in her love when you meet her.
Yeah,
And so that's the first person many people meet when they come to camp. They go straight to their hotel to check in.
yeah,
So,
yeah. No, she's perfect for that.
mhm.
When you were going different places for your research, what was it that really made you say, okay, this is some place that I want to learn at. This is a place that I want to eventually make a home at.
Well, I came in contact with Camp Chesterfield. It's really interesting because I initially was trying to find a topic for my PhD dissertation, and I was very much interested in some aspect of religion. I did my master's on Francisco Franco's role in saving Sefardine during World War II, so I knew I wanted to continue that. And then someone had mentioned something about spiritualism, and I didn't know anything about it, to be honest. And then I was home visiting some of my high school friends in Shelbyville, and we went to Cagney's, which is a restaurant in Shelbyville. And one of my friends said, "Oh my goodness, there's Sarah Brown. She's the famous psychic." And I thought, Shelbyville has a psychic? I didn't even know. So she came over to our table, and someone said in our group, "Are you giving messages today?" And she said, "Well, in fact, I had a bus coming from Cincinnati, but they just canceled, so I have time." And I immediately said, I want a reading. So many of us decided to have a reading right then and there. And I just found her to be the most wonderful, loving, warm person that I'd ever met. And she became my teacher, my mentor, and then my dear friend from that moment on. And she invited me. She said, "Why don't you come and visit me at Camp Chesterfield?" Because she said at that moment, she said, "You can do this work. And I think that you will be a certified medium someday." And of course, I thought, "Oh my goodness, that'll never happen," type of thing. And then I did. I went to visit her. And again, I had the same experience you did. When we drove into the grounds, it was almost like there was an energy shift outside the gate and inside the gate. You just felt this energy shift. And we drove around, and I was looking at all the quaint little cottages, and it just was so adorable and so well kept. The fountain was going. They had the chimes with the songs on the hour. It was just magical. It was one of those experiences. It was a beautiful summer day, just wonderful. And then little by little, she was instrumental actually in introducing me to many spiritualists, because when I started my research, there was a lot of opposition, or I shouldn't say opposition, resistance, because oftentimes mediums are taken advantage of when asked to do interviews and to open up about their work. And there was this hesitation by people thinking that, I was going to exploit them or make them look foolish or wacky. And so she was able to convince people, he's doing research and he's hopes to publish this, and this would be good for the movement in general. So please assist him in his work. And she did. She was able to get me a number of the respondents I needed
Yeah.
for a questionnaire that I was doing, in interviews, actually. She was fabulous.
Yeah. So, and I'm kicking myself because I forgot to bring it with me to my office, is a copy of your book, Talking to the Other Side. Um, I think anybody who identifies as a spiritualist or a medium should have a copy of it because
Well, thank you.
it's incredibly thorough. You know, obviously it's academic from a research perspective, but it also includes some really wonderful interviews, like with Sarah Brown and a couple others. Um, Part of the motivation you mentioned was sort of this questionnaire, this idea or this investigation, and I think that the components of that are kind of in one section of that book.
It is, yeah.
Over the years, what have you found? Like, are there common denominators? Are there certain conclusions that you've come to?
Well, yes. One thing, and it hasn't changed, it's changed a little bit. I did another research study this past year, and I was able to use SurveyMonkey, which was much better than when I did it the first time, because it really is much easier for people to use. The one thing I'm still finding out that spiritualism is an aging religion, and we still need that influx of young people that will take the banner and take it into the next generation. It's better than it was when I did my first research. I mean, the first time, it was really astounding how old mediums were, and it didn't seem like there was not very many people waiting in the wings to kind of usher in the next generation. Fortunately, that has changed, but we still need to have more younger people interested in pursuing development and becoming ordained in order to carry on the religion. And to be honest, we need to have more activities for kids.
Yeah.
We need to get kids interested at an earlier age too. And I know that Camp Chesterfield is working hard to do that and have done several programs. I know Lilydale is very good about that. And I assume Casadega is as well. But that was one thing that really struck me, and it still is seemingly a bit of an issue. And it's very heavily female too, and that still hasn't changed. From the very beginning, spiritualism was very attractive to females because they were given equal footing. And that's something that many mainstream religions don't do. Women are given back seats oftentimes to leadership, to actual ministerial duties. In spiritualism, women are on equal footing with men completely, and this was very attractive to women 150 years ago as it is today. And still today, women basically run the camps for the most part. Women are the backbone to camps, and that shouldn't be cast aside lightly because it's a very important aspect of spiritualism's history. The fact that spiritualism was very instrumental in the abolition movement and the suffragette movement, and today with same-sex marriage even. I mean, spiritualism has always been on the cutting edge of social issues, always 20 to 30 years ahead of regular society in accepting different aspects of progressive politics, thankfully.
Right.
And we continue that on and make sure that we keep that attitude within the movement and religion.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, these particular times that we're in, both from the perspective of social issues because of all the racial inflammation and the political things, and then on top of it you have this virus. And I've been really impressed with not just Chesterfield, but I've seen a lot of other churches and camps really getting on board with technology and virtual classes and virtual church services, which I think is great, and maybe hopefully is one of those things that helps sort of bring some of those younger people into the equation. Who knows?
Well, sadly, spiritualism always has to be dragged kicking and screaming into new technology, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, the attitude when I first started going to Camp Chesterfield was websites were beginning to be really popular. And even getting that started, there were some of the older mediums that said, well, people will find us when they need to find us and will come when they need to come. We've never done any advertising. We don't need to do that. And, those of us I'm now one of the old ones, believe it or not. I mean, most of them I'm going to be 60 next year, and I'm one of the senior people. Whereas, 30 years ago, I was one of the newbies that was saying, well, why don't we do this? And the old ones would say, no, we've never done that. We can't do that. So the silver lining for the whole COVID is that it really did fast forward a lot of churches and camps into, and thankfully at Camp Chesterfield, in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, we had this huge influx of 30 something, 40 something people that started coming and participating in camp and are now residents and mediums. And they were just there, right, ready, and they knew exactly what to do. And I think Camp Chesterfield was one of the first spiritualist camps and churches to really embrace the whole remote, virtual, on-demand platforms. And we started Zooming very early, before other places had never heard of it. And we were already up and running and having our regular church services and gala services. And now we have classes. And even after, when this whole thing is over, I still think that's going to be a part of our regular program. I don't see us going back to complete face-to-face. I think we will always have some aspect. I hope that even after people are allowed to go back to church services, that they will allow those to be Zoomed. And because people like me, I live in Japan, and I really enjoy being able to tune in and watch a church service, say hello to my neighbors and friends and new people, and just see the community of it. And I'm hoping that continues on even after the face-to-face comes back to being the norm again.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think, like you said, I don't think that a lot of places are going to go back. They may offer both things, but it was definitely the kick that was needed. And the other thing too, as far as the website goes and Zoom, there's so much information when you really start digging through the website. It leads to so many other things, interesting recordings of the past. But another thing that I really love about Chesterfield is, even though there are different places that teach courses and classes, you're the only place that I know of that sort of has a very, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's a very thorough, comprehensive
education system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a college.
Absolutely.
It's like a college, yeah. It's a seminary. Oftentimes churches will ordain ministers after a certain period of time of them doing a mouth to ear type of instruction, and which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But Camp Chesterfield, from the very beginning, Clifford Bias actually was the impetus in putting that forward, that we need an actual seminary, we need a college of spiritualism to train and to prepare people for the ministry and for mediumship. And thankfully, he did do that. And actually, I did all my work through the Universal Spiritualist Association, which he started as aside from Camp Chesterfield, although he still managed the education arm of Camp Chesterfield even after that. But they had a distance program, and that was very helpful to me at that time when I was in the mid-90s, when I was going through my development and ordination classes. They had it online, and thankfully Camp Chesterfield recognized their program, and I was sanctioned. So I was ordained by sanction to Camp Chesterfield.
Oh, nice. Now, it's funny that you mentioned him, because he was actually on my list of things that I was going to touch on. You hear all of these things of mediums of the past and these pioneers, and he's always been one figure who's fascinated and intrigued me. What is one or a few of the mediums that you know of from Chesterfield's past, besides maybe the Bang sisters, who we'll talk about in a second, um, that you would have loved to have met or sat with?
Well, Charlie Swan is another name that I would love to have had an opportunity to meet with. Lillian D. Johnson, another wonderful. Now, her daughter, Phyllis D. Johnson, I did know and was friends with because she was at camp when I first started going, and I got to know her. And Charlie Swan's wife just passed away a few years ago, I think. It hasn't been that, or maybe even just less than that. So there's still that connection to the past with certain people that are still at camp. But unfortunately, we've lost so many of our old mediums. And we did do some oral history. We got a grant through the FCCF, and we did an oral history program. And you can see that on YouTube, where a number of mediums are interviewed and they talk about Camp Chesterfield like we're doing. But I wish we'd done more. There were a number of people that needed to be, I don't want to say deposed, but interviewed, I guess, about camp and their memories of it. And we also received a grant through the FCCF to digitize a lot of our archives. And that's phase 1 was done, and we still have at least phase 2, maybe even phase 3 to get everything. And that's through the IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University library, that you can go online and actually pull up Camp Chesterfield and go through a lot of our documents and pictures and things like that and actually see. And that's a project as the camp historian that I want to continue. I want to get everything digitized just in case there would be some type of tragedy where we would lose the physical things. It would always be there in perpetuity digitally. And that's very important to me that we continue that project. But we received $14,000 in a grant on that, and it went quite quickly. I thought it would cover a lot more than it did, but as those things go, you know how that is. But within that, you can see a lot of the old mediums and a lot of the things that had gone on in the past. And there's even some recordings of some of the really old, like Mamie Brown and Louise Irvin. She has a recording that was done on cassette, but we were able to upload it. And those are fascinating because those were done, I think, in the early 80s. So they were going back to like the 50s and 40s and talking about how camp was. And see, we're getting to the point in 2020 that anyone that is in the 1990s are getting fewer and fewer.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem that long ago, but it's getting up to be 30, 40 years now.
Right.
Which the human life, average of 80 or something. So we need to continue to do that. And Normandy Ellis has been instrumental in doing a lot of the interviews for that project and the oral history. She did a wonderful job. And it's really nice to sit and listen to some of those people who were interviewed.
I know I spent a few days going through the I Remember series. I think is that what it was? The I Remember, or?
Yeah, that's the cassette ones on the webs or the digitized archive, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and those were wonderful. Those were just absolutely wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so neat because Reverend Terry Ryan, usually if I'm in camp, I'll meet up with him, and I always get these little like droplets of history or things from when he was young and training at camp. And then one night, I think maybe it was the last time I was there, we were at James and Jeremy, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Their house. And they pulled out all of this stuff that was left in their house when they first moved in there, and just the amount of history and the artifacts. It was just really fascinating. So when I was listening to those recordings, I was hearing a lot of the names and some of the similar stories that I heard from them. So that was really, really kind of special. Now, you live in an interesting house at camp
Yes.
because your house used to belong to the Bang sisters.
Well, they never owned it, but when they summered at Camp Chesterfield during high season, that's the house they would rent, and they did that several years.
Okay.
So it's called the Bang Sisters house because they were the most famous residents ever in that house. Although there have been other quite famous people who lived in that house as well.
Okay.
One of the very first transgendered women in Indiana lived in that house, and she had a little beauty shop.
Really?
And Louise Irvin told me the story about her. And I found a book in Spanish that talked about her and her life at Camp Chesterfield. And I bought several copies, or I received several copies. I gave one to the library at Camp Chesterfield to have, and I have one my own. But it was very interesting. So how the different people interpreted the home and how they, because the house had burned at one time too, unfortunately, because the roof had a very interesting star shape.
Mm,
um, and unfortunately it's not like that today, because after the fire they just made it in a normal, pitched roof
I see.
style. But yeah, the Bang sisters would live in that house when they would be at Camp Chesterfield. And they did a lot of their work on the front porch and also in the front living room, where they used the light coming in from the window, and they would cover the canvas and have the box of paints below and then sit in meditation. And I felt energy, and I can't say for sure that it was the Bang sisters. It could have been a more recent resident of the home, but both Shingo and I have felt presence there, and we've had especially clairgustance experiences where we smell floral. And just in one spot in the very front living room, I remember when we first moved in, there were no air fresheners or anything plugged in or sitting around. And there was one spot in the center of the living room where we could smell this floral like gardenia, and then just a foot away you couldn't, and right there you could. And again, so it was very, very interesting and exciting.
Yeah.
And when we first moved in, of course, we just put everything in the front living room, and I think it upset the spirits that were there because they were very active. Like, who are these yahoos coming in here and disrupting and junking up this house until we got everything arranged the way we like it? Then things settled down. But one thing that I noticed at night, it was almost like we could hear voices chattering, and it was almost like a radio that was not quite on the right station.
Yeah.
You couldn't make out what they were saying, but you could hear like chattering. And another time, I was upstairs in one of the guest rooms making the bed, I think, and Shingo was downstairs putting together a bookshelf. And suddenly I saw something run up the stairway, and I thought, was that Shingo? And so I basically said, yelled for him. And then I heard him downstairs hammering on that bookshelf. And I thought, okay. And then he almost immediately, when I stuck my head out of the room, he was at the bottom of the stairs. He said, I just saw somebody run up the stairway. And I said, I saw it too. So, it's not your imagination. I felt that energy. I saw that wisp of energy run past as well. So it's been interesting, and we welcome it. Of course, it doesn't scare us at all. We're very happy. We always say anyone of benevolence and love and light are welcome in this home. So,
No. Did you know the history going into the house, or did you kind
oh
of?
yes, it was very well known that the Bang sisters had lived there, and that was one of the attractive parts of that house for me.
Yeah.
Because as an historian, I thought, wow, how wonderful it would be to have that home and to be able to live there. So no, that that was very much. And I don't know if you know that the street that goes behind the house, that is a very odd. Grandview Drive is the park side, and that's the address. And there's no way to enter homes from that way. It's just a walking path. And that used to be the way they took the horses to the stable, which used to be at that end of the camp. So back in the pioneer days, people would bring their horses and bring hay for their horses and firewood, and they would camp out. That's why it was called Camp Chesterfield. And they would walk the horses along Grandview. So a road was never made there. Similar to Parkview, it's a walking path as well, except they have an actual asphalt walkway, whereas we just have little stepping stones along the whole way. So you have to enter all the homes via Western. And so the Western Drive was called Tin Horn Alley at one time because of all the trumpet mediums that were there. So that was the most popular place to live before the cathedral was built. Once the cathedral was built, then many mediums moved their cottages physically, or when a cottage became open, they moved to that Parkview and Eastern Drive, because if you think about it, when 800 people leave the cathedral after a service, and back in those days it was filled to the capacity, then they wanted to be on the walkway as they were going to their cars. So people wanted to live on that side of camp because they had their books out on the front porch for people to sign up for readings. So that became the preferred place to live after the cathedral was built in the 1950s. Somewhat to a lesser degree when the auditorium was there, because there's always been some type of a huge structure in that same place. And I have to say, I really admire Lilydale for keeping their auditorium so pristine and so beautiful, because those old buildings don't really last long. In Indiana winters, New York, in lake effect winters from Lake Erie, it takes a toll every year. I mean, every spring I just kind of hold my breath to think, okay, what needs to be repaired, what needs to be fixed this year because of the winter that we just had. Right. And that's always a constant problem. And our fountain has been a recipient of the bad weather over the years. And unfortunately, it's not in working order now. And there is a movement to try to get that fixed. But it's like a swimming pool. You've seen that fountain. When Mabel Riffle, I mean, they had a very sweet little fountain before, and she said, no, we need bigger. We need this big, beautiful. And, to her credit, she was able to raise the money and build this big, beautiful fountain. But with the fountain comes a lot of maintenance, and the foundation cracks just like a pool. I mean, it's the size of a swimming pool. It really is. It's huge. So trying to raise the money to get that, but it is so quaint. I don't know if you've ever seen it running, but in the summer, it's so beautiful to see that fountain running and the birds singing and the chimes, the hymns on the hour, which we need to get that fixed as well. It's very hard to find those types of technology today to repair that. Right. But that was always so quaint to walk the grounds and have all that going on.
One of the other things that I really love, one of the spots, are the toadstools. Can you explain what those are for people who don't?
Yes. The toadstools are unique to Camp Chesterfield. Those, I think the best way to describe it, it was the original psychic fair where mediums would sit at tables and people would stand off to the side and wait till an opening, a medium was free, and then they would sit down and have a reading. And students later put their favorite mediums' names or teachers' names on those tables. And those are made out of Indiana limestone, which is good in the sense that it's, for this area, for the area of Indiana. So, but it does, every year, those are damaged as well. And sadly, you know, it's very hard to repair those. A number of years ago, we had a woman who since passed into transition, sadly, but she and her husband did a lot of repair on those. But it takes a very special person that knows masonry and that type. Anyone just can't slap some cement on it because it won't hold. And that's one problem. And we do have an issue with that sometimes because we have a lot of very well-meaning members who want to assist and do things, but if they don't have the expertise behind it, we'd rather them not do anything than to perhaps take a chance on ruining something. So we have to be very careful who we allow to do work on some of our more historic and unique items there at camp. But the toadstools used to be, you know, before air conditioning, that's how people would. Now, of course, with the cafeterias air conditioned, anything like that is done inside because, well, you know, Americans, we don't like to be uncomfortable. So the idea of sitting out in July or August in the center of grounds is not very appealing. And the tarmac, you know which one I'm talking about, where the Mother Mary statue is?
Oh, yes.
The Mother Mary statue is actually on the pulpit that used to be the outside service area. So the huge asphalt area there, that was filled with iron benches, and it was filled with people to come for afternoon services and message services and lectures and different things. And at some point, one of the residents, Suzanne Greer's husband, thought it would be a nice area to do a display of Mother Mary, and which it is, but as an historian, I wish we could move Mother Mary someplace else and return that to its, you know, original purpose. The two benches were for the mediums to sit and wait to give messages. The pulpit was the lectern that was used to give messages and sermons. And a lot of people don't even realize that, because if you don't look at it from the tarmac side, you don't really see the pulpit. You just see this structure that the Mother Mary's in front of. So at some point, I would love to return that to its original state, and if possible, to have some type of services out there. You know, in the spring and fall when it's cool and those big, beautiful trees that are over, it wouldn't be that hot. And I think it would be a really fascinating and fun way to go back to the past to allow people to actually have that opportunity to have an outdoor service, because that's how they did it for 100 years.
Right, right. When you were at camp in the 90s, was there still a lot of physical phenomena mediums?
A few, yeah.
Did you ever participate in any physical phenomena seances?
Oh yes, I went to trumpet seance. Yes, there were. I did get to visit apports. Yeah, there were.
Do you remember, like, was there a particular experience that really just kind of like put the nail in the coffin for you, of sort of either like shifting from belief into knowing, or that just kind of, you know, opened you in a way?
Well, yeah, actually, it goes back to when I was doing my research, when I first started my research on spiritualism. And Sarah Brown said that she would do a seance for me so that I could have that experience to take notes and things. And we did it in Shelbyville, in my house in Shelbyville. And there were several of us there. And she started the seance and she said, well, first of all, she said, I have your mother's mother here with a young girl named Evelyn. Will you accept them? And I said, well, of course, my mother's mother's in spirit, but there's no Evelyn in my family. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, they're saying this message is for you. I was a newbie. I didn't know. Today, I would say, yes, I accept that message. Worry about the details later.
Yes.
But not knowing what I was doing, I said, well, I pretty much know my family, and there's no Evelyn in my family. So I think it must be for someone else. So she said, well, I'm going to let them go. She let them go and then went on to the next person. And then later that evening, I called my mother and I said, does the name Evelyn mean anything to you? And she got really quiet and she said, I had a half sister, Evelyn, who died when she was 10 years old that
Mm,
I haven't thought of in years. But my mother would speak of her when she was alive because she had been jumping rope and complained of a side ache, and her mother just thought she pulled a muscle. In fact, it was appendicitis. And by the time the country doctor got there and they opened her up, it was too late. The appendix had burst and then she died. So my mother never knew her, but she had heard of her. But that made me a true believer because people often say, well, you probably give the information to the medium. And here she's telling me, and I'm saying, no, there's no Evelyn in my family. And I didn't know about this story, this family story. So that's why I tell people, who are going for a message or who are going to a service for message service, accept whatever's given to you and then you work it out later. And oftentimes I've found being in church when a medium has a person that they're trying to connect with someone and they go to someone else, but later the person says, I'm sure that was my father or that was my aunt. I say, well, then it was a message for you. Mediums are human. And I mean, the best medium is only 80% correct. And they do have issues with connecting sometimes. So if that message resonated with you, then it was as much for you as it was for the other person. So go ahead and accept it and take it for what it is.
absolutely. So I'm just kind of looking, I made just a list of different things that I wanted to be sure that I wanted to cover. And
Mm-hmm.
you're so thorough and so eloquent that I think you like weaved everything all together that I knew that I wanted to touch
Well,
on.
thank you.
Yeah.
I've
Uh,
enjoyed this. I appreciate you inviting me to be interviewed. It's an
yeah,
honor. Thank you.
absolutely. I've always enjoyed your insights and just you as a person. I think you're wonderful, and I know.
Likewise, I knew that the first time I met you. I thought, okay, this is a mover and a shaker. He's going to be a force in spiritualism. And I'm so happy for what you're doing and everything that you do to promote the movement, the religion, and the history of our religion.
Well, thank you,
Thank you.
thank you. The history fascinates me. That's probably why we get on. Um, it's just it's for so many different reasons, and so I try to learn as much about it as I can because I think it's important to remember where we came from, and
Yeah.
I think that will kind of inform where we go. And you kind of touched on this a little bit when we were talking about technology, but maybe a good place to sort of leave off is as far as spiritualism being an aging religion, where do we go to ensure that we essentially survive as a movement? What changes? I know we need to get the younger people in, and we're getting kind of reluctantly with the times with the technology. But is there anything else that you think that you would like to see happen to really keep things moving?
Yes, I think that you touched upon several of the things right there. Being open, thinking outside the box, I think is very important. Um, I think it's human nature to get kind of dug into a certain idea or way of doing things. And just because we've never done it some one way in the past doesn't mean we shouldn't try it because, people will be more open to things if they feel like they have um, some sort of um, I can't think of the word I want to say. Um, Sorry, I just had a blank on that. But the idea that we need to listen to the younger people because I mean they're our future, and we need to adapt. I mean we can't change the fundamentals of our religion. I mean those are very important, and those have a historical precedence that we need to continue on with. But I think there's a lot of areas that we can listen to younger people and allow them to take things and run with it so that it does promote the religion and allow more people to be exposed to the religion. And like you said, I mean, having the website, I remember it was a big deal when Camp Chesterfield finally decided to get a website. And there were people that were dead set against it. Why do we need a website? We've never had a website before. And now it's just so commonplace that we can't imagine not having a website. The fact that people can go there, find out exactly what's happening on which day, find out about the history, and find out. And you know, Shingo did the website for a number of years, and he's the one that really got it built up and started as the current incarnation of the website. And it's being run now by someone else who's doing a wonderful job. And with social media, I mean, with Facebook and Twitter and all these different platforms, we need to use that. And one of the big problems I had in my first research was no medium had email.
Okay.
I mean, it was just so few people. So that's why it all had to be handwritten out. And it's amazing I got as many responses as I did. But that was the old school type, and people were more comfortable with that. This last research study I did, I was very happy that, gosh, I got so many responses from people. If I remember, I think it was 150 from all over the world, because I decided I wanted to find out about spiritualism in other countries. And in fact, I've applied for a grant through the Japanese government to try to do a research project on spiritualism around the world, where I would go to New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain to meet people and to interview and find out what the state of spiritualism is there, because I'm pretty well know what it is in the States, which is the strongest probably. But it's interesting, Great Britain has a very different style of spiritualism, but it's a very strong and active force in Great Britain. So I want to know more about what they're doing and how maybe we could learn from what they're doing, and how they train and develop their mediums and ministers and things. So I did go to Australia and visit a spiritualist church there, and it was very enlightening and interesting, a little bit different than the way we do it. And even Camp Chesterfield is very different. You know, the Camp Chesterfield mediums have been known as the name callers, very proud of the fact that they not only get impressed with information from a loved one, but they give details, confirmation details about names. And that has always been one of the positive monikers of Camp Chesterfield trained mediums. And oftentimes, if you go to the stump at Lilydale and a medium afterwards, I'll say, "Did you study at Camp Chesterfield?" "Yes, I did." "You know, how did you know?" And it's like, "Well, I can tell by your style," because again, it's that rigorous training that Camp Chesterfield does, that whole idea of having a development teacher, and you progress your mediumship through that teacher, mouth to ear, but yet you have classes that you take and you actually learn about different aspects of mediumship and spiritualism and metaphysical topics that kind of makes Camp Chesterfield stand out in a very positive way. Now, don't get me wrong, Camp Chesterfield has had its fair share of charlatans and, you know, fakers in the past, and we still have to deal with that, because sometimes when you, even to this day, when you Google Camp Chesterfield, you get some of those stories about things that have happened in the past. But I have to say that today, if anyone is caught doing anything nefarious or untoward regarding spiritualism, they are promptly asked to cease and desist and thrown out, because I mean, that's the kiss of death for spiritualism if you have anyone trying to commit fraud. And even some of the big names in the past got caught up in some of that, because they sometimes would get to the point where they became so well known that people expected certain things. So if you're having an apport seance where you're guaranteeing that they're going to get some sort of apport from spirit, I think that's a huge mistake, because it causes people to try to do things that would allow them to be able to produce on that type of a claim. And I mean, we both know you just don't know what you're going to get from spirit. And I appreciate mediums when I'm in a seance or something that says, now, we're going to try to bring in and we're going to try to do this, but I'm only human. I can't guarantee that.
Right.
Are you familiar with Richard Scholler?
I don't believe so.
He's out of New York, outside of New York City, but he is wonderful. I've gone to his transfiguration seances, and he's just absolutely outstanding. He does it in the red light. And I mean, it was at Lilydale, and he was up there, and and that's one of the other experiences where you're talking about physical phenomenon. He said, now, you can talk and yell things out during the seance, but don't yell my name, because his name's Richard. He says, oh my gosh, that's my Uncle Richard. He said, it'll bring me right out. So don't do that. And it was amazing, because this woman who I didn't know standing next to me, we were seeing the exact same thing. I mean, these wonderful faces just kept coming over, just, men from like the 1700s with those pork chop sideburns and things you could really see, and the women in bonnets. And it was just amazing what he was doing. And that was one of the really outstanding experiences that I had with physical phenomenon at Lilydale, was watching him. And he helped me with my first research project as well. And I noticed that you had mentioned earlier about John Lilac.
Yes.
Or Lilic.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a wonderful. I do miss him terribly. He worked through the Universal Spiritualist Association as well. That's how I met him in one of our summer symposiums that we had at Ball State in Muncie. And I interviewed him for my first research project and put that in the book, because he just had such a wonderful demeanor and manner about him, and so genuine and serious about spiritualism and his mediumship. And I really appreciated that, because I mean, there are people who like to grandstand about their abilities and things, and I guess we need personalities of all types in this movement. But it was so refreshing to meet him, and I felt the same way about Sarah. Sarah was just so genuine and such high integrity when it came to her mediumship, and I appreciated that. And that's why I used both of them in my first research study that's in the book.
It was interesting when I first came across his name. I was doing some research on transfiguration, and in one of the books that I had, it was talking about him. And I forget how it happened, but I had your book at that point, but I had not read it. And then, I don't know, maybe I think maybe I posted an article, and maybe perhaps you commented something, and then it turns out that, your interview with him was in your book, and he was like right on my shelf the whole time. So it was kind of this full circle moment that was really neat.
Yes, and I met some people at Casadega who were really good friends with him, and they had some very interesting phenomenon occur even after he passed, that he would come through in seances, and they had phenomena occur.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, I know that especially with the time difference being on the other side of the world, that, I'm glad that we were able to find a time that worked for both of us. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate your energy and all the work that you've done. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. So thank you for letting me pick your brain.
Well, let's do it again. Thank you for inviting me. And I feel honored that you asked me to do this, and it's my pleasure. Anytime I can talk about spiritualism, I don't need an excuse. I'm happy to do it.
Great.
So, and continue doing what you're doing. I follow you, and I love your live blogs you do on Facebook. When I turn it on and I see you're talking, I always tune in because I always learn something. So yeah, it takes a village, and we have to do it together. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you. Now, is it evening or afternoon or morning where you are?
It's morning. Yeah, it's morning. So it's about 10 a.m.
Okay, well, in that case, I wish you a great rest of your morning. And tell Shingo I send my hellos.
I will. Thank you. Take care and continue doing your work. Stay in touch.
See ya.
Bye.